Jake's time on SportsVox this morning. A very good morning to you, Jake.
Thank you, Tanya. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on the show. Well, you've had a pretty exciting career so far, Jake, and you're in the middle of your PhD. So tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this side of things in terms of sports scientists and also strength and conditioning training.
Yeah, so I guess I got into the PhD sort of, I guess my interest from a research side of things. Previously, for about eight to 10 years, I'd been working in industry as a strength and conditioning coach. And I'd sort of gotten to a point where, you know, all the roles I had held, I was sort of a one-man band and I didn't have a lot of managerial experience. So I decided to take on the PhD down in Bendigo because not actually necessarily the research side of things, but more the industry component of it to be linked with the Bendigo Pioneers and actually work as their high performance manager. So what that was potentially going to offer me was, you know, a bit of a performance team underneath me for me to develop some managerial skills, I guess develop some new contacts and associations in a new sport. I'd never been involved in AFL before. And then I guess I got down there. My wife and I moved down there in 2019 and started undertaking the PhD. And research had sort of always interested me, but I guess the access to the vast amount of data and sort of relevant data that I got access to through the AFL, I guess sort of ignited a bit of a spark from a research perspective, and that's sort of where my career is moved now, away sort of stepping away from the tools, I guess, as a strength and conditioning coach, and you know, more towards the sports science side of things in my current role. So that's sort of a brief background.
It's very interesting. And in terms of your PhD, how does that help you with your current role with the Broncos now?
Oh, massively. I mean, the skill set I use day to day here at the Broncos was really just developed through the PhD. I always had a love for data and sort of exploring data, and you know, that is now my day-to-day job. So, you know, over the course of the 3 years or 3.5 years now, the skills that I developed to analyse all my data and sort of visualise all my data through the PhD, as I said, that's now my day-to-day job at the Broncos in terms of feedback to coaches, players and other, I guess, key stakeholders. So, yeah, without the PhD, I wouldn't be in this current role.
It's a high-performing...
I don't have a PhD yet, but...
You're close to it. You're close to it, Jake.
Getting there, yeah.
You're getting there. But yeah, busy time for you as well. But heading into the NRL season as well. So you're finishing your PhD middle of the year, and you've got the NRL season starting very soon as well. So that's a pretty high peak time for you.
Yes, I'm pretty flat out at the moment. So we have just finished up our pre-season matches. We go into round 1 next week. So, you know, from a day-to-day perspective, it might slow down actually a little bit because we're in season. We train a little bit less compared to pre-season. But, yeah, I mean, the pre-season period on top of, I've had some pretty key milestones in the PhD in terms of my pre-submission and that kind of thing, and trying to get some papers published. So, yeah, I've been pretty busy the last sort of 5 to 6 months, which has been good.
So in your role as a sports scientist, they'd be leaning on you for that strength and conditioning side of it. Is that the case? So are you looking at the high demands of a rugby league player and how much it impacts on their body?
Yeah, so I guess having the strength and conditioning background helped me to I guess obtain this current role. I mean, it's always good to have a sports scientist that can deal with the data and understand the data and interpret the data. But, you know, equally having someone that can understand the programming side of things and the development of physical qualities. So I guess that puts me in a good position moving forward. You know, I've developed programs, I've run high performance programs, I've developed athletes before, so having that underpinning knowledge and I guess experience helps me, in my day-to-day sports science role. But now, I'm really sort of the provider of knowledge, I guess, in my current role. I collect the data and I interpret it and feed it back so that we can, on a day-to-day basis, that we can inform our training to then ultimately improve performance.
And what's the difference between the Aussie rules and rugby in terms of those characteristics of physical demands, I suppose, between the two codes?
Good question. I mean, you guys down in Victoria don't necessarily know a huge amount about rugby league with the massive focus on AFL, but first and foremost, just the running demand. So we run a lot less in rugby league than AFL, obviously. So in AFL, players can be covering upwards of 14, 15 Ks. An average for us would sort of be about 7, if a player plays 80 minutes, 7 to 8 Ks in an NRL game, 80 minutes, 7 to 8 Ks in an NRL game. But on the flip side to that, the contact element is massive compared to AFL. So that's where a lot of our energy expenditure and I guess physical demands come in with the tackle and the acceleration, deceleration requirements in terms of moving up and back as a defensive line, whereas AFL is a lot more open and that kind of thing. So in terms of our programming or training, you could imagine we actually run a lot less. We spend a lot more time focusing on the contact, the tackle. We do a lot of wrestle work. And then our strength component to our program is probably a lot more, there's a lot more emphasis put on that because obviously we need players to, be able to withstand the rigours of high velocity contacts, multiple of them. So, we're putting weight, we're putting size, and increasing strength and power of our players with a lot more, I guess, emphasis than they would in AFL.
And with the Broncos finishing 9th last year, I think they'll be looking at you, won't they, for those key data grabs, won't they, for this season? Yeah,
we had a good off-season review. Look, to be honest, we're not doing too much differently. I came into the role in round 2 last year. So last year for me, from a sports science perspective, was really just getting some key information in place and being able to provide that consistently throughout the season. We've done that well, and in this off season, we've developed a few new things that we sort of feed back to coaches and players visually that weren't in place last season. So I think those things have helped in the coming in a good space, and yeah, we definitely want to be finishing higher than 9th last year. And I think people look at that and finish 9th, but we had multiple weeks up in the top 4, and we just had a pretty catastrophic end to the season. If some of our wins were spread out across the season, then it was actually a fairly successful season from our standpoint.
Jake Jennings joins Tanya Jones on SportsVox 106.7. Jake is a sports scientist with the Brisbane Broncos NRL team and is also currently finishing up a PhD at La Trobe University. A very interesting PhD. I just want to go back to that, Jake, because it's philanthropic funded, isn't it, by the Holsworth Research Initiative, as well as you had that involvement with Bendigo Pioneers and AFL Vic. How important has it been, like, working with the Bendigo Pioneers, as you mentioned, in terms of initiation into this big role that you've got at the moment?
Oh, it was huge. So, as I said, I had never worked in AFL before, so, credit to La Trobe and the people involved at the Pioneers at the time for taking a punt on someone with no AFL experience. I guess my broader background potentially led to, influencing that. But, moving down to Bendigo we were only there for 2.5 years, and COVID was rife during that time, so it probably wasn't the experience we were necessarily expecting. But in saying that, it was a great opportunity and opening for my career in terms of what I'm doing now. I've diversified a little bit more. I've changed direction slightly from a strength and conditioning perspective, more now into sports science. And I'd worked a lot with developing athletes, and it was awesome to come down there. And, the Pioneers program is pretty significant in the region. And, as well as developing a lot of, AFL listed players, I think, the broader scope of the program and what it does in regional football for regional boys and girls is really great. So it was great to be a part of that program for the 2.5, three sort of seasons I was down there.
Yeah, for sure. And Bendigo Pioneers has produced some pretty high quality players, haven't they? And I just wanted to touch on those players that we've had the draft season, haven't we, with the AFL? And for those that are successful, I'm sort of thinking back to the Dacos brothers as well in terms of their height. To be successful in the draft, would you say that speed side of it, contrary to your rugby league, would be one of the things they'd be looking at to draft you into the AFL? Actually 3 of my papers, we sort of investigated the characteristics that are associated with draft success, and speed is definitely one of them. The biggest thing that came out of it was, and whether it's a maturation thing or, just their ability to impact an AFL program as quickly as possible, but generally the players that are getting drafted are those bigger, more physical, I guess, physically mature players. So from a NAB league perspective, they really want to be getting those athletic sort of profiles in and developing them from a skill perspective. They seem to be the ones that are getting drafted. The other massive influence on draft, particularly for some of the fixed position players, was the AFL agility test. And there was actually a lot of research out there that, well, not a lot, there was some research out there that said the AFL agility test wasn't necessarily a draft predictor, but in our modelling it definitely was. And that's potentially because we went down to a positional level. So some of those fixed position players, ruckmen, the key forwards and defenders, obviously height is important, but then their ability to be able to move and sort of separate themselves from a defender is a key component to being drafted, from what we found as well. Yeah, very interesting stuff. And Jake, you have got a bit of a background in tennis and indeed rugby as well. You wanted to play for the Wallabies at one stage?
Oh, I think every Queensland kid does. Obviously rugby unions are probably bigger up here than down south there. As a sport, it's not necessarily going too well at the moment. And to be honest, I don't even watch much rugby union anymore. I'm more NRL and AFL now in Queensland. I played a lot of rugby, and you grow up wanting to obviously play at the highest level you can. So, I played a bit of tennis growing up as well. So those were my 2 sports. Never really got exposed to AFL.
Well, a bit of opportunity there too for you, Jake, in the future potentially to get involved in tennis. A bit of travel internationally there for you. Yeah,
potentially. Look, I've always sort of maintained I'm pretty open to working in any elite sport at this point in time. I'm really enjoying my time in the NRL at the moment. Again, it's another sport that I haven't been involved in. So I think I'm just sort of widening my scope and broadening my experience, and who knows where I'll end up.
Very much been very interesting talking to you this morning, Jake. I'll let you go and get on with your busy day. I'm sure that the Broncos are waiting for you to come down and train them a little bit more.
It's actually a day off today, so I'm enjoying some time at home for one. No, thank you very much for your time.
Good stuff, Jake. Thanks very much for joining us.
Cheers. Thanks, Tanya.
Jake Jennings, who's the sports scientist for the NRL team, the Brisbane Broncos, joining me on 106.7 Phoenix FM and SportsVox. And looking forward to your